Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's start by making sure that my screen sharing works. Maybe the wrong one. This one. So everybody should be able to see a nice kind of picture of Yosemite and a little video browser in the background. And if that's the case, then I'll start the presentation and we'll move on. If it's not, then please raise your hand right now and I'll find a way to get you that image. Okay, not hearing any complaints. So I'm going to do a quick overview of what we're talking about today so that you make sure that you're in the right place. During that overview, I'll give you the link to the Etherpad page. I've already copied it into the chat window, but if you don't have access to that, it'll show up here in the browser window. It's a shortened link, so you should be able to transfer it over. And so away we go. So thank you very much for coming today. My title here on the slides is slightly different from the title that Jana shared with us in terms of managing our data and controlling where things are stored. We're going to talk about the cloud today, but we're only going to talk about two tools or services that we offer within the cloud. And so just so we're all clear at the outset, when we talk about cloud, there's a kind of a meme that's going around on the internet right now that says that cloud is really just somebody else's computer. And for the most part, that's true. There's a caveat that should be attached to that, and it's somebody else's computer that you have remote access to. And under that understanding, pretty much everything we do on the internet is really using the cloud. So what matters for understanding the cloud and how it's being used is what the tools and the other computers that you have access to, what you're allowed to do on those systems. So we had a presentation a few weeks ago on the cloud proper, and in that presentation we looked at a software tool called Openstack that Compute Canada has installed on a number of its systems, and that tool allows you to basically build your own computer out of virtual pieces of hardware on our systems. So we have very large computers, and you're able to go in and say, I need this much RAM, I need this much storage, I would like this many CPUs to be part of this system, I want to install this operating system, and then have that run on our system as if it was a computer, and you can log into it from your desktop. And you can do that for both Linux and Windows. Today we're going to look at two tools that are sometimes thought to be more like the cloud proper in terms of the kind of application or programming experience that we have. One of them is called ownCloud, and that can be confusing because the name of it is ownCloud, no space between the words. So if I want to say that I have my own cloud, that's different from saying that I have my own cloud. So let's try and avoid that confusion. And the other one will be Globus, and as Jana mentioned, that's a tool for moving data, particularly large quantities of it quite quickly, and it manages that process for you. But it also opens up additional storage opportunities because it gives you very easy browser access to services that to storage services that Compute Canada offers. So we're going to talk about two ways today for cloud powering your research: ownCloud, the product, and Globus. So Compute Canada, for those of you who aren't already aware, we're a not-for-profit organization. We're funded by the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, or CFI, and a couple of other partnerships that are in there as well. And our responsibility is ensuring that the digital infrastructure for industry and research exists in Canada. So we have roughly 200 staff that are part of research institutions, typically universities across the country. And Compute Canada exists as kind of an umbrella organization across the entire country. And there are 4 consortia that work in partnership with Compute Canada. So today, the seminar that we're providing right now is delivered by WestGrid, as much as it is a co-branded Compute Canada presentation. And WestGrid is the administrative region from Manitoba all the way as west as we can go to the end of Vancouver Island. Of course, there's going to be a Compute Ontario, and that previously had 7 consortia inside it. There's still about 3 that are active, but we look at Compute Ontario as a single consortium. There's Calcool Quebec, and there's also AceNet, which is all the Atlantic provinces. So if you're anywhere inside Canada, you're probably in one of these consortia, unless you're up in one of the territories. But you'll have access to the resources from one consortia and any of the others through the partnership agreements and some of the access that CompuCanada grants you. So just before we go on, I want to make it clear about the account types and the allocations that are available so that you understand how you can share the resources that I'm about to tell you about. So there are two account types. The first is a PI, or a principal investigator account. Now these are available typically to faculty members at universities and librarians. There are a few other cases, but they're pretty rare. Those are the two most common cases. And the librarian case is a big win, because at different campuses across the country, sometimes librarians are faculty and sometimes they're not. And even within some universities, sometimes a librarian is faculty and sometimes they're not. So to remove this ambiguity and to provide a high level of research support across the country, CompuCanada has recognized the role that librarians play and have given them the same level of access regardless of the institution that they're in. Principal investigators get access to a portion of resources. It's roughly 20% of the resources on every system CompuCanada has. It fluctuates from system to system, but we'll call it 20. And this is a default allocation. And everybody can play in this pool. And what it does is it gives all researchers, librarians, anybody with a PI account, the ability to test the systems, to get used to or to get access to kind of a bare minimum of resources just to get your work done. So without having to do anything but sign up for a free CompuCanada account, you can get access to some pretty significant resources, two of which we'll go over in just a moment. Principal investigators also have the ability to apply for a granted allocation. And so this is how we carve up the remaining 80% of the systems. So if you decide that you need terabytes of storage or you need thousands of CPU processors, then chances are you're going to need to put in for a granted allocation. There's a peer review model that allocates this on a yearly basis and gives researchers chunks of data and storage. Well, not chunks of data, they give you chunks of storage, chunks of compute, and other resources so that you can carry out research at a higher magnitude than you can with just a default allocation. Every PI has the ability to sponsor what in principle is really an unlimited number of other accounts. So these are people who will help you do your research, and they're typically graduate students, but they could be somebody from industry, they could be somebody from outside of the country, whether they're a researcher or not. And every sponsored account gets its own separate set of resources within the default allocation. So when we talk about ownCloud today, the PI can have their own account with ownCloud, and the sponsored users can also have their own account, and they're not shared. So this is a really nice way to provide resources to graduate students, but it's also a really nice way to share computing power with people you're collaborating on with around research elsewhere in the world that perhaps don't have access or would not otherwise have access to the kind of resources that CompuCanada can provide. So it's a nice bonus for creating international collaborations. The only real difference with the sponsored accounts is they cannot apply for granted allocations. Those must be applied for by the principal investigator or the PI, and whatever is granted as a granted allocation, if it is shared with the sponsored users, that's a case of a shared resource. So if you received 100 terabytes as a granted allocation and you had 5 graduate students, they would share in that space. Unlike ownCloud, where the principal investigator would have their own account and each of those 5 graduate students would have their own accounts. And they would only share that data if they chose to. So that's a brief overview of CompuCanada and the account types and the allocations that are available. What we'll look at today with ownCloud and Globus both fall under the default allocation, and I'll point out ways that the granted allocations might matter for these in just a moment. So on our next slide, we have 4 resources that are potentially important for you. The first one, ccdb.compucanada.ca. This is the CompuCanada database. That's what CCDB stands for. And what this is the resource that we use to manage all the accounts. So hopefully, if you're planning to follow along when I start the hands-on portion in just a moment, you have already signed up for a Compute Canada account, and you've turned on WestGrid access within that account based on the instructions that were sent out earlier in the week when you registered. If you have any problems signing up and getting an account, then you can send an email to accounts@computecanada.ca, and somebody will get back to you. Usually this is a very quick turnaround time. You send an email at 3 a.m. We do have some night owls out there that might grab it for you, but we'll certainly grab it during business hours if that doesn't happen otherwise. The email, the URL, the web address, the third thing on here, this is a link to that Etherpad page. So the URL is bit.ly/1, capital X, lowercase h, capital E, lowercase m, capital F, lowercase z. And what Etherpad is, and I'll just swap over to it right now so you can see it. Try and blow that up a little bit if I can. So what Etherpad is basically kind of a shared bulletin board. So anybody can type in here with a link. It doesn't track who you are. You do have the option of adding your name if you want, and it'll change the color. But what I'll use this for is for two things. One, if there's things that come up during the webinar that would be really helpful for you to copy and paste into your own browser, here's an option for me to do that, so I can provide these for you here. And if you have questions that you would like answered and perhaps they take a little bit longer, or you'd like to just put them off to the side for now, one of the other experts that's supporting this call will be watching the Etherpad page, and they can give you an answer here. And we'll keep it open after the webinar closes, and we can continue to have a discussion. I'll point out as well that the Etherpad it's a nice free service, but every so often, etherpad.org wipes their Etherpads clean. So if you come back here in a month or so, the Etherpad content may not be here. So if you want something in particular, you should copy it out. Swap back to the presentation. The last resource here is info@westgrid.ca, and Jana is monitoring this email right now. So if you would rather send an email to Jana, it can be a little bit more private. If that matters to you and your question, then you can just send it info@westgrid.ca, and we'll collect these, and Jana will either intervene during the presentation, or we'll save them till the end, and we'll clean them up there. So that's the overview. So let's talk about these two tools. And here on the screen, on the left side, that little cloud bubble for ownCloud, you can see pretty clearly that there's no space there, and it can be easy to be talking about my own cloud versus my own cloud and have people be confused. So ownCloud is a tool, and we'll talk about that first. So what is ownCloud, and why do you want it? And I think you do want it. When I do this presentation live, I will ask people in the audience to put up their hand if they have Dropbox. And I'll ask them to keep up their hand if they would like more storage on Dropbox. And what happens here is that pretty much everybody in the audience puts up their hand. There's a few people that have a Microsoft product or they use Google Drive. But any of you who are using the Microsoft product used to get 15 gigabytes of storage. I just got an email saying they dropped down to 5. And the point being that most people want more storage with Dropbox because they probably have 3 gigs or 5 gigs. Maybe they've invited friends so that they get an extra few 500 megabytes every now and then. But eventually you run out of friends. You have to make your own accounts. I made extra email accounts and invited myself to be my friend back in the day so I could have more Dropbox storage. But this is nonsensical for researchers. So rather than a few gigabytes, like 3 or 5, Compute Canada will give you 50 gigabytes of Dropbox-like storage in the cloud. And so this will be space on one of our servers that you will have access to through a phone, a tablet, or an internet connection through a computer. You can actually download a desktop client, and we'll do that later today. And so the experience is very Dropbox-like. It's currently managed by WestGrid. So eventually this will probably become a Compute Canada service, but right now it's a WestGrid service. So you'll see that in the URL when that shows up in just a moment. And so there's multiple devices and interfaces. It has encrypted data transfer, right? So we're going to use a secure browser connection to connect to it. And unlike just storing things on Best Buy drives that you stash under your desk, or perhaps trying to run your own version of ownCloud at home, which is an option because it's free and open source software. So you could run your own ownCloud at home. Here we have redundancy within the servers. There's daily backups that are done. We don't keep an offsite copy of ownCloud, but this is already at a much higher level of service than you can probably expect from your own home or anything that you can put together. So, without further ado, let's go have a look at ownCloud. So, here's the URL. It's ownCloud, ownCloud.westgrid, westgrid.ca. And you don't have to worry about putting the HTTPS in front. It will automatically turn that on. So I'm going to drop out of the presentation and into a browser window. I'm going to use, I'm running a virtual machine with Windows in the background. So you should be able to follow along here. If necessary, if somebody would like to see this done on OS X as well, because that's important, then I'll swap into OS X and you can see it happen in the browser there. So, sorry, that's Globus, which we'll do next. So when you come to the ownCloud page, you're greeted with the kind of login that you should be familiar on from most websites or web tools that are available. And so here they're asking for a username and password. We do not yet have single sign-on across Compute Canada and all the consortia. The username and password that you need here is your WestGrid username and password. So I'm going to put mine in. I have to swap over to password tool and copy and paste my password out because it's really long. But I'll be right back with that. I need to paste my password. So just give me a moment here. There we go. Just takes a moment there to log in. And so what you'll see now is all the contents of your ownCloud instance with Compute Canada. And this is being run on a server called Bugaboo at Simon Fraser University. And so you won't have everything that you see in my account right now. I've used this a few times for a few demos. So I have a thing called shell-novice-data, which you won't have. But you will have a document called ownCloud User Manual. And so we'll go through how to use these pieces in just a moment, but I find it's most useful to actually have it installed in your desktop at the same time so that you can switch back and forth between the views and see the content on your desktop and see it appear on the server out there. So when you first log in, you might not see the screen that I have right now. You might see a screen that will look a little bit more like this. And so I'm going to the top right-hand corner. I'm clicking on my name. There's a little triangle that points down beside it. I'm going to click on Personal. And when you log in for the first time, it'll probably invite you to get the apps to sync your files. And that's here at the top of my personal page. And so what we're going to want to do here is get the desktop app. So we're actually going to download the desktop app now. And there's one trick here, and if I don't point it out and you don't follow along with this really closely, you're going to get lost, and it's going to cause some confusion. So let me point that out. So I'm clicking on Desktop App. It's going to take me outside of the WestGrid site. It's probably going to open a new tab in your browser window. It's taking you actually to ownCloud.org, and this is where we can download the tool to actually run our own instance of ownCloud. So every time I load this page, it kicks me to the very bottom and gives me options 4, 5, and 6, which are not the options that I want. So I need to scroll back up. But the trick here is that you don't want option 1. Get your own cloud server is not the option you want if you just want to use the Compute Canada version of ownCloud, which gives you 50 gigabytes of Dropbox storage, and be able to synchronize it with your desktop. For that, you want option 2. And there's a desktop client. The desktop client is free. You can also install a mobile client on your phone or a tablet. Typically, this is done through the Apple App Store or through Google Play. They're going to charge you something like $1.99. This is not Compute Canada charging you. This is ownCloud for the app, and then you can use it to access our tools or our instance of ownCloud. So you're going to click on Desktop Client, and it should auto-detect your operating system, and it should download it for you. So please do that now. It shouldn't take very long to pull down ownCloud onto your desktop, and then we'll go quickly through the install procedure. I've already downloaded it, but I haven't installed it. So I'm just going to close this, and we'll wait just a brief moment. While that download is coming, I'm going to go back to the other tab that shows my actual instance on WestGrid. This is the one that has the list of the files, but it still has this. So I'm going to click in the top left corner of the cloud, and that will take me back to all my documents. We'll go through this piece while we wait for the download for some of you. Even if you don't do the download, you can still drag and drop files into this interface, and it has some nice features. So if I hover over top of these documents or these folders, on the far right side where the size and the modification times are, I can see some options here. I have an option to download it, and if I click that, it will automatically download it for me. But I also have a sharing option. And so I'm just going to click that sharing option right now. And I've already turned this on to share. But when you turn it on the first time, it'll have a little forking icon. And you could share it directly with other WestGrid users if you know their IDs. And that's what it's asking for in this box here. It's just not catching up with me right now. So it's not putting that prompting text in here. But typically the way we're going to share is with a link. So if I click that box, share with link, I get a number of other options. So these are really nice. And the last time I checked with Dropbox, it did not have all of these. And they can be really important, particularly if you're dealing with sensitive data. So one, you just get a link, and you can just copy and paste this link and share it with anybody. Fine, straightforward. I can also just email the link directly to a person. I don't even have to copy and paste. I can just type their email in and click send. The security options here that are nice, one is password protect. And so if I click that, it now asks me to choose a password. So I can send the link, but I can send the password via a different means. And so now they're separate, and so the link is more secure than just an open link. Do not send the password and the link in the same email. It's almost no security to that process at all. But if you sent them by a separate means, then you would have some additional security. The feature that people really like, I'm a big fan of it when I'm teaching classes. I want to share a folder with my students. But when the term's done, I don't want them to continue to have access to that folder, and I'm going to forget. It's the end of the term. I've got to do all sorts of other work. So I can turn on a set expiration date. So perhaps you have graduate students who are part of a research project, and their time is up at the end of the summer. Maybe they shouldn't still have access to that data. So if you set expiration date, you now have the ability to click in that box. It'll bring up a calendar, and you can choose the day that it turns off. I'm not sure if it includes the day that you select or if it turns off as soon as it is that day, but regardless, it's a really nice feature. So let's go to installing. So I'm going to go to my downloads folder, and here on Windows, I've got a little pop-out window that shows all my downloads, and I'm going to choose to run the ownCloud instance. Just doing a little bit of setup. Wants to know if I actually want to allow this program to make changes to my computer. I'm going to say yes. Quick little setup menu here. So here it's going to ask me where I want to stash it. Putting it in the standard place is okay. We're going to do a standard install. Where do I want to put it? I'm going to put it inside my C drive, inside Program Files x86. It's going to get its own folder in there called ownCloud. And it's going to go through and it's going to install ownCloud. And for anybody that's installed a program like Dropbox recently, it takes roughly about the same amount of time. You can click on Share Details, and you can watch it install all the different dynamic link libraries. Sorry, it decided to kick me out there. Go back to the desktop. So while it's installing here in Windows, I'll switch back to OS X, and you can see the consequences of that install on OS X. And then we'll come back and see what it's doing here on Windows, for those of you who are following along directly there. So this is OS X, and when I install ownCloud, it will install a folder that should appear inside the favorites list on Finder. I'll just move it up to the top here so it's easier for us to find right now. And if we look inside this folder, we see we have a folder called Documents, one called Test, one called Shell Novice, and one called ownCloud User Manual. This is running ownCloud on my machine, and anything that I put in this folder will immediately be shared with ownCloud on that system running at Simon Fraser University that I can then access through any internet browser, or if I've installed it on a mobile device. So nice feature there, and let me just demonstrate that really quickly by just moving some other document, something from all my files. I'll make a copy of this. I'm going to copy a file called data.csv into ownCloud. I'm going to paste it. So we can see it goes into the folder here. There's a little synchronizing icon there, and now there's a check mark. It's not very big. It's only 100, just over 100 kilobytes. And so if I come back, going back to Windows now, this is still installing ownCloud in the background. Probably taking so long because I'm running Windows as a virtual machine. And if I reload this page, or refresh it, There's data.csv. So it's very easy for you to just move content around. Very, very similar to Dropbox if you're familiar with that experience. Now, ownCloud is chugging away here in the background. Oh, we're getting some movement here for the install. And what it will do when it's actually running is it's going to run as a service. I'll go back and show this on OS X, and then I'll come back here to Windows because it's almost done. So here we are in my OS X window. And in the top menu bar, I'm using El Capitan, but this should be the same for any recent version of OS X. There'll be a little icon that looks like a cloud, and it has a little green check mark. And the green check mark means that we've had successful syncing. And so ownCloud will run in the background as a service up here with the other services. And here you can see I've got the Adobe Creative Cloud. I'm running VMware, Google Hangouts. And so if I click on it, this will give me the option to do my settings and so on and so forth. I can even open the folder directly if I'm not sure where it is. So let's go back and look at Windows. It's almost done. I'm going to click Next now. Oh, the window hasn't caught up. Just give me a moment. There we go. So the installation is complete. I'm going to click Next. It basically tells me it's done. We're going to keep Run ownCloud as a check mark here, and I'm going to choose Finish. And so it looks like there isn't anything happening. But if I come down here to the bottom right corner, we can see the hidden icons, or what's sometimes called the system tray. If I click on that, see I'm running VMware. I'm not sure where ownCloud went. So let's see if we can find it. Come on, Windows. There we go. So I'm just going to do what's easiest. I'm going to do a search for ownCloud. Comment here from Jana. Come on, ownCloud. Sorry here, I'm just having a bit of lag. There we go. Well, I apologize, but in my virtual machine, it is chugging along so slowly that it's not giving me the kind of response that I would like here. So I'm able to show you where all these things are. All right, well, let's pick through it manually. So I'm going to go to my File Explorer. Yeah. Finally it showed up. My computer's being very slow. It should have just run. So I apologize for that. So I'll minimize this file manager window because I don't need it. So now ownCloud is running. You'll see this window. And so that server address, this is where you're going to type in ownCloud.westgrid.ca. You don't need to worry about the HTTPS. It'll take care of that automatically. If you had chosen to run your own instance of ownCloud as a server from your home, then you put in the URL for that. So I'm going to type in ownCloud.westgrid.ca and choose next. It's going to ask me for my credentials. Again, these are your WestGrid credentials, your WestGrid username and password. So I'm going to go pull those out of my password safe. Once you put your credentials in and the proper URL, you have a choice to sync everything or choose what to sync. For this first time, it's probably useful to just sync everything. Here I've got about 1.8 megabytes, but you'll have a little bit less because you don't have those extra documents that I've been pushing around for demos. And you can also choose where you want that folder. And so I'm going to put it inside my home directory. This is the default. So inside users, there's a folder called john.simpson, and that's my user account. And it will automatically create a folder in there called ownCloud. And so then I just click connect. So when this is done, we have the option to open ownCloud in the browser, which we've already done. So I'm not going to do that, but I will open a local folder. So I'm just going to click that button that they offer there as a choice.
Hi, John. This is Jana. If we have someone who's having trouble logging into ownCloud, what would be the best way to troubleshoot that?
So the issue for that, we can have trouble here. Most of the trouble that I find with this is when people have just created an account. So if they've just made a WestGrid account, it usually takes about 24 hours for that account to propagate through all of the WestGrid systems and to have this be set up and provisioned for them. So that's the number one factor is time. So if they made it this morning or even just last night, it might not be turned on yet. Number two is not using the WestGrid credentials. So they'll use some other credentials that they intended or thought were the WestGrid ones, but sometimes that's not. If this is a problem, the first thing to do, they can email accounts at westgrid.ca. They can wait a little while, or they can email me after this, and I can help them work through it.
Okay, great.
And so once we're in here, we can see we have the file folder open, and we can see the same content that I had up here. So it's very easy for me to push data around. So from my OS X instance, I pushed it to the cloud, and now I'm running ownCloud here on what's essentially a separate computer that's running Windows, and I can pull the content down. Very handy tool for managing a research lab where you've got a lot of documents or protocols that you need to share with your team. And you can give them access to this as well if you're a PI because of the default allocations and your ability to sponsor users and their accounts. When ownCloud is running, on Windows, it will show up on the bottom right corner inside this system tray. And it took a while for it to actually start here because of my slow VM. I apologize. But there it is now. And if I click on that, it will bring up the ownCloud interface, right? And this is where I can control whether it's launched on startup or not. So if you want ownCloud to always be on, you want to come in here and in the general settings, you're going to want to click the Launch on System Startup option. You can ask for confirmation before you download certain files, right, etc. So there's a number of options here for you to choose. If you have to go through a proxy, you can set this up. You can also control what folders are actually synced within ownCloud. So you can share a root folder, but turn off sharing of folders within that folder if you want. You can do that through this interface. So it's a pretty nice tool, and it's particularly nice because of the 50 gigabytes of storage, which is probably a magnitude of 10 times what you get through most other services before you have to start to pay. So that'll be the end for ownCloud, unless people have any questions. And again, as Jen has pointed out, one of the #1 questions is I can't log into it right now. And that's usually that 24-hour period. So I apologize for that. And that's the kind of thing that CompuCanada is looking to change in the future. Single sign-on, one password, one username for all the services across all the consortia, and response times for when you sign up that are a little bit closer to what you expect from commercial services. Oh, let's show you one more thing here for ownCloud. This bit.ly link, so the URL here is bit.ly/1 uppercase S lowercase j 4 lowercase z lowercase I capital G. This should take you to the ownCloud user guide on the WestGrid site. If you're stuck or this isn't working for you, you don't want to type it out, you can just search ownCloud WestGrid in Google, and you should very quickly find the user guide for that as well if you need a little bit more.